My husband stood over me with documents and forced me to sign away my $1 million estate and luxury mansion. He thought he won, until the lawyer exposed his darkest secret. My name is Antonia, and I am 34 years old. I am standing in the empty parlor of my grandmother's mansion right now, and I can still see his shadow in the corner where he trapped me that night. He held those papers like weapons. He smiled like he had already won. But here is the thing about predators. They never expect their prey to fight back, and they certainly do not expect the secrets they buried to rise from the grave. Before I take you into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If stories about justice and karma resonate with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Now let me take you back to where it all began, to the day I first met the man who would try to steal everything from me. I need to start with my grandmother Eleanor Whitmore, because without understanding her, you cannot understand what was at stake. When I was 7 years old, my parents died in a car accident on a rainy November evening. They were driving home from my school play where I had performed as a sunflower in a garden scene. I still remember standing in my little green costume waiting for them to pick me up. They never came. My grandmother arrived at the school 2 hours later, with red eyes and trembling hands. She wrapped me in her arms and whispered that I would be coming home with her now. Home meant the Whitmore estate, a Victorian mansion that had been in our family for 4 generations. It sat on 3 acres of manicured gardens with 12 bedrooms, a wine cellar that dated back to the 1920s, and a wraparound porch where my grandmother would tell me stories every evening. Growing up in that house was like living inside a fairy tale, even though the circumstances that brought me there were tragic. My grandmother poured all her love into raising me. She taught me how to make her famous apple pie from scratch, using apples from the orchard behind the house. She showed me how to tend to the rose garden that my great-grandmother had planted decades before I was born. Every Sunday, we would sit by the fireplace in the library, and she would read to me from her collection of classic novels. But more than anything, she taught me about family. She would hold my hands in hers, her fingers soft and wrinkled with age, and she would say words that I carry with me to this day. This house holds our family's soul, Antonia. Promise me you will protect it. I always promised. I never imagined how hard keeping that promise would become. My grandmother passed away 3 weeks after my 31st birthday. Her heart, which had carried so much love for so many years, simply gave out one peaceful morning. I found her in her favorite chair by the window looking out at her beloved garden. She had a small smile on her face, as if she had seen something beautiful in her final moments. The grief that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced, even worse than losing my parents, because I had been too young then to fully understand death. This time, I understood everything. I understood that I was truly alone. The funeral was held at the estate as my grandmother had requested in her will. People came from all over the county to pay their respects. Eleanor Whitmore had been a beloved figure in our community, known for her charity work and her generous spirit. I stood at the entrance of our home accepting condolences from what felt like hundreds of strangers, my heart completely hollow. That is when I first saw him. He approached me near the end of the reception when most guests had already left, and I was exhausted from smiling through my tears. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet 2 inches, with dark brown hair that fell slightly across his forehead. His eyes were a warm shade of hazel, and when he smiled at me, there was something genuine in his expression that cut through the fog of my grief. He introduced himself as Derek and explained that he was an acquaintance of my grandmother's lawyer, Harold Pemberton. He said he had heard so much about Eleanor and wanted to pay his respects personally. Unlike the other guests who had offered quick condolences before moving on to the refreshment table, Derek stayed. He asked me about my grandmother. He wanted to know what she was really like beyond the public image. And for some reason I still cannot fully explain, I found myself telling him everything. I told him about the apple pies and the Sunday reading sessions. I told him about how she would stay up all night with me when I had nightmares about my parents. I told him about her laugh, which sounded like wind chimes on a summer afternoon. Derek listened to every word as if nothing else in the world mattered. In my darkest moment of loss, this stranger made me feel seen. After the funeral, I expected to never hear from Derek again. But 3 days later, he called. He said he had been thinking about me and wanted to make sure I was doing okay. No one else had called. My sister Grace lived in California and had returned there the day after the funeral, promising to stay in touch, but immediately getting consumed by her own life. My grandmother's friends were elderly and dealing with their own grief. I was alone in that massive house surrounded by memories and silence. Derek's phone calls became a lifeline. He would call every evening and we would talk for hours. He asked about my day, about what I had eaten, about whether I had managed to sleep. He never pushed for anything. He never made me feel uncomfortable. He was simply there, a steady presence in the chaos of my morning. Our first real date was 6 weeks after the funeral. He took me to a small Italian restaurant downtown, a place with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. It was the kind of restaurant my grandmother would have loved, and I told Derek so. He reached across the table and held my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Over the following months, Derek became my anchor. He would bring me flowers for no reason. He would surprise me with picnics in the garden. When I cried, which was often during those early months, he would hold me without saying a word. He seemed to understand that sometimes silence is the greatest comfort. There was one thing about Derek that particularly touched me during our courtship. He never seemed interested in money. Whenever I tried to pay for dinner or buy him gifts, he would refuse. He told me that he was doing well enough in his real estate career and that he did not need anything from me except my company. After years of watching distant relatives circle my grandmother like vultures waiting for their inheritance, Derek's apparent disinterest in wealth was refreshing. It was one of the things that made me trust him. He proposed to me exactly 6 months after my grandmother's funeral in the rose garden that I loved so much. He got down on one knee, pulled out a modest diamond ring, and asked me to spend the rest of my life with him. The ring was not expensive, and he apologized for that. He said he wanted to save for our future rather than spend money on a flashy piece of jewelry. I thought it was the most romantic thing I had ever heard. We had a small wedding at the estate, just a handful of guests, including my sister Grace, who flew in from California with a skeptical expression that never quite left her face. Harold Pemberton, my grandmother's lawyer, attended as well. He shook Derek's hand firmly and congratulated us, though I noticed he watched my new husband with an unreadable expression throughout the ceremony. After the wedding, Derek moved into the Whitmore estate with me. As I fell asleep that first night as a married woman, I felt something I had not felt since my grandmother's death. I felt hope. I believed that my grandmother had somehow sent Derek to me, that even from beyond the grave, she was making sure I would not be alone. I had no idea how wrong I was. The first 6 months of our marriage were everything I had hoped they would be. Derek was attentive and loving. He would bring me coffee in bed every morning. He would leave little notes around the house telling me how much he loved me. We would cook dinner together in my grandmother's kitchen, laughing and dancing to old songs on the radio. It felt like the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. But looking back now, I can see the small changes that I missed at the time. They were subtle at first, so subtle that I convinced myself I was imagining things. It started with questions about money. Derek would casually ask about my finances, wondering aloud how much the property taxes were on the estate, or what my grandmother's investments had looked like. He framed these questions as concern for our future, and I believed him. He was my husband, after all. It seemed natural that he would want to understand our financial situation. Then he suggested that I let him handle the money. He explained that he had years of experience in real estate and understood investments far better than I did. He said he wanted to protect me from the stress of managing such a large estate. I thought it was sweet. I thought he was being considerate. So I gave him access to one of my smaller accounts, the one my grandmother had set up for household expenses. Derek seemed genuinely grateful. He kissed me on the forehead and told me I was the best wife anyone could ask for. He said we were going to build an incredible life together. I went to sleep that night feeling secure and loved. A few weeks later, Derek mentioned that the estate needed some renovations. The roof was getting old, he said. The heating system needed to be modernized. He started presenting me with estimates from contractors, and the numbers were much higher than I expected. When I questioned the costs, he would get a slightly wounded look in his eyes and ask if I did not trust his judgment. The guilt would wash over me immediately, and I would apologize and agree to whatever he suggested. But the renovations never seemed to happen. The contractors Derek mentioned never showed up. When I asked about it, he would tell me that there were delays, supply chain issues, scheduling conflicts. The excuses varied, but the money kept leaving our accounts. I should have paid closer attention. I should have asked more questions. But I was so desperate to believe in the life we were building that I ignored every warning sign. Then I started noticing the phone calls. Derek had always kept his phone close, but suddenly he became secretive about it. He would leave the room to answer calls, speaking in hushed tones in the hallway or stepping outside onto the porch. When he came back inside, his expression would be carefully neutral. One evening, I asked him who he had been talking to for so long. His answer came a little too quickly, a little too smoothly. He told me it was just a difficult client, someone who was being demanding about a property sale. Real estate was stressful, he explained. He did not want to burden me with the boring details of his work. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But there was one night when I could not pretend anymore. Derek had fallen asleep on the couch after dinner, exhausted from what he claimed was a long day of meetings. His phone buzzed on the coffee table next to him. I glanced at the screen without thinking. The message was from someone labeled simply as M. The words on the screen made my stomach turn. Just give me more time. I am working on it. I stared at those words, trying to make sense of them. Working on what? And why would Derek need to give someone more time? I wanted to wake him up and demand an explanation, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe. Or perhaps it was the sinking feeling that I did not want to know the answer. I went to bed alone that night, lying awake for hours while my mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it really was about work. Maybe I was overreacting. By morning, I had almost convinced myself that the message meant nothing. A week later, I went for a walk in the garden trying to clear my head. The rose bushes were blooming beautifully, and I found myself talking to my grandmother as I often did when I was there alone. I asked her if I was being paranoid. I asked her if Derek was really the man I thought he had married. That is when I saw Mrs. Patterson. She was an elderly woman who lived in the house next to our property, and she had known my grandmother for over 40 years. She was standing at the fence that separated our gardens, watching me, with an expression I could not quite read. "Good morning, dear," she called out. "How are you settling into married life?" I walked over to her, grateful for the company. I told her things were fine, that Derek and I were very happy. But she did not look convinced. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that sent a chill down my spine. "I have seen that young man of yours," she told me, "meeting with a woman at the coffee shop downtown. They seemed rather close." My heart started pounding. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked her what she meant. She described the woman as young, probably in her early 30s, with blonde hair and expensive clothes. She said Derek and this woman had been sitting at a corner table, their heads bent together as if sharing secrets. I shook my head and told Mrs. Patterson that she must have been mistaken. Derek was probably meeting with a client. Real estate agents meet with people all the time. It did not mean anything. But Mrs. Patterson did not back down. She took my hand in hers, her grip surprisingly firm for a woman her age. "Your grandmother always said to trust your instincts, dear. She was never wrong about people." I walked back to the house in a daze. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, the ones she had said so many times throughout my childhood. "Trust your instincts, Antonia. They will never lie to you." That night, I watched Derek more closely than I ever had before. He was charming as always, telling jokes over dinner and complimenting my cooking. But now I could see something behind his eyes, something cold and calculating that I had never noticed before. Or maybe I had noticed and simply refused to acknowledge it. I did not sleep well that night. My instincts were screaming at me, but I was not ready to listen. Not yet. The changes in our marriage accelerated over the following weeks. Derek became bolder in his requests, and I became more confused about what was normal and what was not. One evening over dinner, Derek brought up the topic of our finances again. He said he had been thinking about our future and wanted to make sure we were properly prepared for anything. He suggested that I add his name to my main bank account, the one that held the bulk of my inheritance. I hesitated. Something about the request felt wrong, though I could not articulate why. Derek noticed my hesitation immediately, and his expression shifted. It was subtle, just a slight tightening around his eyes, but it was there. "Do you not trust me?" he asked. His voice was soft, wounded. "After everything I have done for you, Antonia, I have taken care of you. I have supported you through your grief. I have tried to be the best husband I can be. And now you are questioning whether I should have access to our money." The guilt crashed over me like a wave. I felt terrible for making him feel that way. I apologized profusely and told him of course I trusted him. He was my husband. We were partners. A few days later, I went to the bank and added his name to my accounts. After that, the spending increased dramatically. Derek bought a new car, a sleek black luxury sedan that he said he needed to impress clients. He upgraded his entire wardrobe to designer suits and expensive shoes. He bought a watch that cost more than most people make in a month. When I questioned these purchases, he had explanations ready. He told me that in real estate, image was everything. He needed to look successful to attract wealthy clients. The money he was spending now would come back to us tenfold when he closed bigger deals. It was an investment in our future. I wanted to believe him. So I nodded and smiled and watched our savings slowly drain away. But the signs became impossible to ignore. I started paying attention to his schedule, noticing the gaps that did not make sense. He would claim to have meetings that lasted all day, but when I asked about them, his answers were vague. He would come home late with explanations that never quite added up. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. to find his side of the bed empty. I walked through the dark house looking for him and found him on the back porch with his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in low, urgent tones, and I caught fragments of the conversation before he noticed me. "She does not suspect anything," he was saying. "Just be patient. It will all be ours soon." He turned and saw me standing in the doorway. For just a moment, his face went blank, completely emotionless. Then the mask slid back into place and he smiled at me. "Could not sleep?" he asked, as if he had not just been whispering secrets in the middle of the night. I asked him who he had been talking to. He told me it was an overseas client, someone in a different time zone. "The real estate market never sleeps," he said with a laugh that did not reach his eyes. I went back to bed, but I did not sleep. My grandmother's voice was in my head stronger than ever. "Trust your instincts, Antonia." The next morning, I decided to look at our bank statements more carefully. What I found made my blood run cold. There were transfers I did not recognize, large sums of money moving to accounts I had never heard of. When I added them up, the total was staggering. Over $200,000 had been moved in the past 3 months alone. I confronted Derek that evening, keeping my voice as steady as I could. I asked him about the transfers and watched his face carefully for a reaction. He did not even flinch. He told me those were investments opportunities he had discovered through his work. He said he was going to surprise me with the returns, but since I had found out, he might as well explain. He pulled up charts on his laptop, pointing to projections and growth curves that he claimed proved everything was legitimate. I wanted to believe him. Part of me desperately wanted everything to be okay. But another part of me, the part that remembered my grandmother's wisdom, knew that something was deeply wrong. That night, I called my sister Grace. I told her everything from the mysterious phone calls to the missing money to the woman that Mrs. Patterson had seen. Grace listened in silence, and when I finished, she said the words I had been afraid to hear. "I never liked him, Tony. He showed up at Grandma's funeral like he was waiting for an opportunity, like a vulture circling a fresh kill. I tried to defend Derek, insisting that he had been nothing but supportive. Grace cut me off. "Just be careful. Check your accounts. Know what is happening with your money, and maybe talk to that lawyer of Grandma's. Harold has known our family forever. If anyone can help you figure out what is going on, it is him." After we hung up, I sat alone in the darkness of my bedroom, listening to Derek snoring in the guest room, where he had started sleeping more and more often, claiming he did not want to disturb me when he came home late. I knew what I had to do. I just was not sure if I had the courage to do it. The decision to investigate my own husband was one of the hardest I have ever made. Part of me still wanted to believe that I was wrong, that Derek truly loved me, and that everything had a reasonable explanation. But the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. I started by doing something I had never done before in our marriage. I lied to Derek. I told him I was going to visit a friend in the city for the day, but instead I stayed nearby and watched him. It felt wrong following my own husband like a detective in a movie, but I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. Derek left the house around 10 in the morning, dressed in one of his expensive new suits. I followed his car at a distance, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He drove downtown and parked outside a coffee shop, the same one Mrs. Patterson had mentioned. I found a parking spot across the street and watched through my windshield as he walked inside. A few minutes later, a woman joined him. She was exactly as Mrs. Patterson had described, blonde and beautiful, wearing clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Derek stood up to greet her, and what I saw next shattered what remained of my denial. He kissed her. Not a friendly peck on the cheek, but a real kiss, the kind he used to give me when we first started dating. Then he pulled out her chair, and they sat down together, their hands intertwined across the table. I sat in my car and cried. The tears came silently at first, then in great heaving sobs that shook my entire body. Everything I had suspected was true. My husband was cheating on me. And based on those phone calls I had overheard, the affair was just the beginning of his betrayal. I managed to pull myself together enough to take a few photos with my phone. I did not know if I would need them, but some instinct told me to document everything. Then I drove home, my mind racing through my options. That night, I pretended nothing had changed. Derek came home late as usual with a story about client meetings that I now knew was a lie. I smiled and nodded and served him dinner, all while my heart felt like a stone in my chest. The next morning, I called Harold Pemberton's office. Harold had been my grandmother's lawyer for over 30 years, and I trusted him more than anyone else in the world. His secretary told me he could see me that afternoon, and I agreed immediately. Harold's office was in a historic building downtown with dark wood paneling and shelves full of legal books. He stood up when I entered, his face creasing with concern when he saw my expression. "Antonia," he said, coming around his desk to take my hands. "What is wrong?" I told him everything. The missing money, the phone calls, the woman at the coffee shop. Harold listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandmother was very specific about protecting the Whitmore estate," he finally said. "She worried about this, you know. She worried that someone might try to take advantage of you after she was gone. That is why she put certain provisions in her will." I asked him what he meant, but he held up a hand. "Let me look into your husband's background first. I have resources people who can find information that is not publicly available. Give me a week, Antonia. Do not confront him about anything. Act normal. Can you do that?" I nodded, though I was not sure if I could. Every time I looked at Derek now, all I saw was the man kissing another woman. All I heard were his whispered words on the phone, talking about how it would all be theirs soon. Before I left, Harold looked me directly in the eyes. "Your grandmother loved you more than anything in this world," he said. "She would be proud of you for seeking the truth. And I promise you, we will find it together." I drove home with a small flame of hope burning in my chest. I was not alone in this. I had an ally, and together we were going to uncover whatever Derek was hiding. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I had to pretend that everything was normal while my entire world was falling apart. I smiled at Derek across the breakfast table. I kissed him goodbye when he left for his supposed meetings. I cooked dinner and asked about his day, as if I did not know every word coming out of his mouth was a lie. But Derek must have sensed something was different because his behavior started to change too. He became more attentive, almost suspiciously so. He brought me flowers one evening, the first time in months. He suggested we go away for a romantic weekend. Part of me wondered if he was trying to distract me from something, but I played along, acting delighted by his sudden affection. On the 6th day, something happened that changed everything. I was in the kitchen when Derek came home earlier than expected. I heard him come through the front door, and something in his footsteps sounded different, heavier, angrier. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. The warm, charming husband I had married was gone. In his place was a stranger with eyes like ice. "I know you went to see Harold Pemberton," he said. My heart stopped. I tried to keep my voice steady as I asked him what he meant, but he cut me off. "Do not play games with me, Antonia. I have people watching you. I know exactly where you have been and who you have been talking to." The fear that washed over me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. This was not the man I had married. This was someone else entirely, someone dangerous. Derek walked toward me slowly, and I backed up until I hit the kitchen counter. He leaned in close, his face inches from mine. "I have worked too hard on this to let you ruin it now," he said. "You are going to cooperate, Antonia. You are going to do exactly what I tell you. And if you do not, I will make your life a living hell." I could barely breathe. I asked him what he wanted, my voice coming out as barely a whisper. He smiled then, but it was a cruel smile, nothing like the warm expressions I remembered from our early days together. "We will talk about that tonight," he said. "For now, just know that things are going to change around here." He left the kitchen, and I collapsed against the counter, shaking uncontrollably. The man I had trusted with my heart and my home had just revealed himself to be a monster, and I had no idea what he was planning to do next. That night, Derek came to our bedroom with a stack of papers in his hand. He closed the door behind him and locked it, the click of the lock sounding impossibly loud in the quiet room. He threw the papers on the bed in front of me. "Sign these," he said. I picked up the documents with trembling hands and started to read. What I saw made me feel like I was going to be sick. These were not regular legal documents. These were papers that would transfer complete ownership of the Whitmore estate, along with all of my grandmother's investments and savings, directly to Derek. I looked up at him, my eyes wide with disbelief. "I am not signing these," I said. Derek's face twisted with rage. He stood over me, his fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment I thought he was going to hit me. But he did something worse. He started to talk. "Let me tell you how this is going to work," he said. "You are going to sign those papers, and you are going to do it willingly, or I am going to destroy you." He told me that he had been gathering evidence against me for months. He had created a file that made it look like I was mentally unstable, prone to delusions and irrational behavior. He had doctors who would testify that I was unfit to manage my own affairs. If I did not cooperate, he would have me committed to a psychiatric facility and take control of everything anyway. "This is your choice," he said. "Sign the papers now and walk away with your dignity, or fight me and lose everything, including your freedom." I was sobbing at this point, my whole body shaking with fear and betrayal. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, was threatening to lock me away and steal everything my grandmother had left me. Derek picked up a pen and shoved it into my hand. "Sign," he said. "Now." I do not know why I did it. Fear, probably. Or shock. Or maybe some survival instinct that told me to go along with him until I could find a way out. Whatever the reason, I signed every page he put in front of me, my signature shaky and barely legible. When I was done, Derek gathered the papers with a satisfied smile. "That was not so hard, was it?" he said. You have 48 hours to pack your things and leave. This is my house now." He walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the darkness. I curled up on the bed and cried until I had no tears left. Everything was gone. My home, my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy, all stolen by a man I had trusted with my heart, or so I thought. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. My grandmother's house, the house I had promised to protect, was being stolen from me, and I had signed the papers that made it possible. As the sun began to rise, my phone rang. I almost did not answer it, assuming it was Derek with more demands or threats. But when I looked at the screen, I saw Harold Pemberton's name. I answered immediately, my voice hoarse from crying. "Antonia," Harold said, and there was urgency in his tone that I had never heard before. "I need you to listen carefully. I have found something about your husband. Something big. Do not do anything. Do not leave the house. I am coming to you right now." I told him what had happened the night before about the papers Derek had forced me to sign. Harold was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that made my heart skip. "That signature may not be valid," he said. "There are things your grandmother put in place, protections you do not know about. Trust me, Antonia. I am on my way." He hung up before I could ask any more questions. I sat on the edge of my bed, barely daring to hope. Could there really be a way out of this nightmare? 2 hours later, Harold arrived at the estate with his young assistant, Marcus. They came in through the back entrance to avoid being seen by Derek, who was somewhere in the house doing whatever victors do after they think they have won. We gathered in the library, the same room where my grandmother used to read to me on Sunday afternoons. Harold placed a thick folder on the table between us. "Your husband's real name is not Derek," he began. "It is Daniel Mercer. And this is not the first time he has done something like this." He opened the folder and spread out documents, photographs, newspaper clippings. I stared at them in disbelief as the full picture emerged. Daniel Mercer was a professional con artist who'd been operating for at least a decade. He targeted wealthy women, usually those who were grieving or vulnerable. He would charm his way into their lives, marry them, and then systematically steal everything they had. Harold pointed to a photograph of a woman in her 60s. "This is Patricia Welling from Florida," he said. "Daniel married her 3 years ago after her husband died. He took over $2 million before he disappeared. She tried to press charges, but he had already moved on to his next victim." He pointed to another photograph, this one of a younger woman, Samantha Reed from Texas. Similar story. He left her with nothing and is currently wanted by authorities there for fraud and identity theft. I felt sick. The man I had married, the man I had trusted and loved, was a serial predator, and I was just his latest target. But Harold was not finished. He pulled out more documents and explained that Monica, the woman Derek had been meeting with, was not just his mistress. She was his partner. They had been working together for years, identifying targets and running the same scheme over and over again. "Here's the good news," Harold said, and for the first time I saw a smile on his face. "The papers you signed last night are worthless." I stared at him, not understanding. He explained that for any legal transfer of property of that magnitude, certain requirements had to be met. The signature needed to be witnessed by a notary public. There needed to be independent verification that the signer was acting of their own free will. None of those conditions had been met. "But that is not even the best part," Harold continued. "Your grandmother anticipated something like this might happen. She knew you would be vulnerable after her death, and she wanted to protect you." He pulled out one final document, yellowed with age, but bearing my grandmother's elegant signature. Eleanor added a special clause to her will and the deed of the property. "The Whitmore estate cannot be transferred to anyone other than you for a period of 20 years following her death. Anyone who tries to circumvent this clause automatically forfeits any claims to the property and its assets." I read the document 3 times, unable to believe what I was seeing. My grandmother had protected me from beyond the grave. Even after death, she was still looking out for me. Harold placed his hand over mine. Your grandmother loved you more than anything he said. She knew there were people in this world who would try to take advantage of your kind heart, so she made sure they could not succeed. He then told me about the plan. He had already contacted the FBI and local police. They had been building a case against Daniel Mercer for years, but had never been able to catch him in the act. Now they had their chance. All I had to do was act normal for a few more days. Let Daniel think he had won. The authorities would handle the rest. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, walking around that house knowing that the man who had tried to destroy me was sleeping just down the hall. But I did it. I did it for my grandmother who had given me everything. I did it for all the women Daniel had hurt before me. And I did it for myself because I was not going to let this man steal my home or my dignity. The day of reckoning came on a Thursday morning. Daniel had called his own lawyer to finalize what he believed was his claim to the estate. He was practically glowing with satisfaction as he walked around the house already making plans for what he would do once he sold it. He talked about buying a yacht, traveling to Europe, living the life he deserved. I smiled and nodded and played the part of the defeated ex-wife counting down the minutes until justice arrived. At exactly 11 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Daniel went to answer it, expecting his lawyer. Instead, he found himself face-to-face with 2 FBI agents and 4 local police officers. Daniel Mercer, one of the agents, said, "You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." The look on Daniel's face was something I will never forget. The charming mask finally crumbled, completely replaced by shock and then fury. He started shouting denials, claiming this was all a misunderstanding, but the officers were not interested in his excuses. They handcuffed him right there in the foyer of my grandmother's house, the same spot where he had first introduced himself to me nearly 4 years earlier. As they led him toward the door, Daniel turned to look at me. His eyes were filled with hatred, and he opened his mouth to say something. But I spoke first. "My grandmother always told me to trust my instincts," I said. "I should have listened sooner. They took him away after that." I learned later that Monica had been arrested at the same time at an apartment she was renting across town. The FBI had found evidence of their crimes going back almost a decade, enough to put both of them away for a very long time. I stood in the doorway and watched the police cars drive away, their sirens, silent but their lights flashing. Harold appeared beside me and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It is over," he said. "You can start healing now." But healing is not as simple as one moment, one arrest, one victory. The weeks and months that followed were some of the most difficult of my life. I had nightmares about Daniel standing over me with those papers, his face twisted with cruelty. I would wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, unable to believe I was safe. During the day, I would catch myself jumping at small sounds, half expecting him to walk through the door with more demands. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Hartley, who specialized in helping survivors of emotional abuse. She helped me understand that what Daniel had done was not my fault. He was a professional predator skilled at identifying vulnerable targets and manipulating them. I was not stupid for falling for his act. I was human. My sister Grace flew in from California and stayed with me for an entire month. We'd never been particularly close, but going through this experience changed our relationship. She helped me sort through the house, boxing up reminders of Daniel and reclaiming the spaces he had contaminated with his presence. She made me laugh for the first time in months, telling stories about her own romantic disasters that made mine seem almost normal by comparison. Mrs. Patterson became a regular visitor as well. She would come over with homemade cookies and sit with me in the garden, telling me stories about my grandmother. She reminded me of the strong, resilient woman who had raised me, and slowly I began to find that strength in myself. One afternoon, about 3 months after Daniel's arrest, I was working in the rose garden when I had a realization. I had spent so much time being angry, being afraid, being a victim. But my grandmother had not raised me to be a victim. She had raised me to be a survivor. I decided to turn my pain into purpose. Working with Harold and some local organizations, I established a foundation in my grandmother's name. The Whitmore estate would remain my home, but a portion of the property would be converted into a safe haven for women escaping domestic violence and financial abuse. They would have a place to stay while they got back on their feet, surrounded by the same gardens and beauty that had helped heal me. The foundation opened 6 months later. Our first resident was a woman named Lisa, who had lost everything to a man remarkably similar to Daniel. Watching her walk through the gardens for the first time, seeing the hope slowly return to her eyes, I finally understood why my grandmother had loved this place so much. It was never just about the house or the money. It was about having a place where people could feel safe, a place where they could heal, a place where they could remember who they really were underneath all the pain and fear. I think about my grandmother every day. I talk to her sometimes when I am alone in the garden or sitting by the fireplace in the library. I tell her about the women we have helped, about the lives we have changed. I like to think she can hear me. I like to think she is proud. Daniel was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Monica received 12 years. I did not attend the sentencing. I had already spent too much of my life thinking about them. It was time to focus on the future instead of the past. The house that someone tried to steal from me became a haven for others who needed protection. My grandmother would have loved that. She always said that a home should be filled with love, and now finally, this one is. If you are watching this and you see yourself in my story, I want you to know something. You are not alone. You are not stupid. You are not weak. The people who hurt us are skilled at what they do. They study us, learn our vulnerabilities, and exploit our kindness. That is not a reflection of who we are. That is a reflection of who they are. Trust your instincts. They will never lie to you. And if you ever find yourself in danger, reach out for help. There are people who will fight for you, people who will help you reclaim your life. My grandmother protected me even after she was gone. Harold Pemberton refused to give up until he found the truth. My sister flew across the country to stand by my side. Mrs. Patterson warned me when she saw something wrong. I was never truly alone, even when I felt like I was. And neither are you. So here is my question for you today. Have you ever trusted your instincts and had them save you from a bad situation? Or have you ever ignored them and wished you had listened? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Let us learn from each other and support each other. If this story touched you in any way, please give it a like. It helps more than you know. And if you want to hear more stories about justice, karma, and the strength of the human spirit, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, no matter what you are going through, there is always hope. There is always a way forward. There is always someone ready to help you find your strength again. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to each other and trust your instincts. Until next time.